I thought someone was trying to frame my dog for a crime spree. That's what I told Officer Dave when he showed up at my porch with 2 baby shoes, 1 sandal, and a very serious expression. I'm not the type to joke when an officer knocks on my door, especially not in our sleepy little cul-de-sac in Vermont, but I couldn't help it. I mean, how could a golden retriever named Scout be the prime suspect in a neighborhood-wide shoe theft? Scout wagged his tail, as if proud of his growing collection. My name's Ben, by the way. I live on Maple Hollow Drive, the kind of street where everyone waves at each other and nobody locks their front doors. At least they didn't, until shoes started disappearing. Sneakers left on porches, boots drying by the fire pit, even a pair of fuzzy slippers left outside by Old Man Parker. Gone. Just like that. It had started about 3 weeks earlier. I didn't think much of it when I found a lone flip-flop in my backyard. Scout has always been a little mischievous, but I figured it was something he picked up on our morning walks and dropped without me noticing. But then, the next day, there was a toddler's rain boot by the shed. And 2 days later, a work boot under the garden bench. I'd wake up, open the back door, and there'd be another odd piece of footwear resting on my lawn like a weird little gift. I joked about it at our Friday block gathering. That's when Mrs. Helen Davis, who lives 2 houses down, gasped and said her gardening clogs had gone missing too. Then Rachel, the newlywed from across the street, said she couldn't find her husband's running shoes. One by one, people started realizing they were missing a shoe. Sometimes 2. That's when suspicion turned into concern. Now I love Scout. He's 8 years old, fluffy as a cloud, and always trying to cuddle with people he just met. But the evidence was piling up. Literally, I checked behind the shed, under the porch, even inside the laundry room. Nothing. So, when Officer Dave knocked on my door with the latest batch of missing shoes, I decided we needed to solve the mystery once and for all. We started with the basics: a leash, a handful of treats, and a GoPro strapped to Scout's collar. I figured we'd turn it into a little adventure. If nothing else, it would make a funny video for my niece. But the truth we uncovered was something none of us expected. That Saturday morning, I let Scout out the back door just like always. Coffee in hand, I watched him trot off with his usual mix of purpose and tail-wagging joy. I stayed close behind, trying not to startle him. He sniffed around the yard, checked his usual spots, then wandered off into the woods behind the fence. Now, I should mention, technically the woods aren't part of my property, but they're not exactly posted either. It's a patch of old forest that separates our street from the highway a mile down. Most of us grew up exploring those woods. They were full of mossy stones, fallen logs, and deer trails leading nowhere. Scout seemed to know exactly where he was going. After 10 minutes of ducking branches and tiptoeing over roots, we reached a clearing. I froze. In the middle of the clearing was a small mound. It was neatly covered in sticks and leaves, like someone, or something, was trying to camouflage it. Scout walked right up, sniffed the top, and wagged his tail like he'd found buried treasure. I got closer and carefully moved the branches. Beneath them was a pile of shoes. Dozens of them. Different sizes, colors, styles. Some looked brand new. Others were muddy or chewed up. There was even an old bowling shoe. And lying on top of the whole thing, like a cherry on a very strange Sunday, was Scout's favorite tennis ball. I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Scout," I said, shaking my head. "You're running your own underground footwear museum." But the laughter faded when I spotted something underneath a pair of sneakers. A faded photo. I pulled it out gently. It showed a man in a hospital gown, sitting beside a woman in a wheelchair. Between them was a young boy holding Scout as a puppy. The corner was stamped with the date, May 2018. I didn't recognize the people. The hospital room looked generic, but the little boy's smile made something tug in my chest. This wasn't just a shoe pile. This was a memory mound. Scout nudged my hand. Back at home, I started making some calls. It took a few tries, but eventually I got a hold of Rachel. She remembered the family. The woman in the photo was named Denise, and her son, Benji, used to live 2 streets over. Denise passed away 3 years ago from cancer. After that, her husband moved away with Benji. No one had seen them since. But here's the kicker. Rachel swore she saw Scout visiting their yard all the time back then. Said the boy and Scout were inseparable. I sat with that for a long while. Why would Scout bring shoes to the woods? Why create this weird little shrine? The next morning, I followed Scout again. This time, I brought a few of the shoes from the pile and a picnic blanket. When we reached the clearing, I laid them out carefully, mimicking how they were arranged before. Scout lay down beside me, resting his head on my knee. And then, I heard it. Footsteps, slow and soft. A boy stepped out of the woods, maybe 10 or 11, shaggy blonde hair, wearing a faded hoodie. He paused when he saw me. "Hey," I said gently. "You looking for these?" He didn't say anything at first, just stared at the shoes, his eyes wide. "Scout's been collecting them," I said. "I think for you." The boy knelt by the pile and picked up the photo. He held it close to his chest. "He remembers," the boy whispered. I nodded. He never forgot. Turns out Benji and his dad had moved back to care for his grandmother, who lived just beyond the woods. Benji hadn't seen Scout in years, but Scout remembered. And maybe, just maybe, he thought the shoes would bring Benji back. We started meeting there every weekend. Scout would bring a new gift, and Benji would come to sit with him. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we just sat in silence. And slowly, the pile stopped growing. The neighbors, once annoyed by the missing shoes, started bringing extras. Old pairs, outgrown ones. They left them in my yard like offerings. No one complained anymore. They understood now. What started as a mystery turned into a quiet tradition. A boy, a dog, a pile of shoes. Hope comes in strange packages. Sometimes it's wrapped in laces and mud and carried through the woods by a golden retriever with a big heart. And this was only the beginning. If you had told me a month ago that my dog was running an emotional delivery service out of the woods, I would have laughed you off my porch. But there I was every Saturday morning, packing sandwiches and an old blanket, following Scout through the trees like he was the one in charge. And honestly, I think he was. Benji started showing up more often. At first, he'd just sit a little ways off, quiet, a bit guarded. Scout didn't mind. He'd plop down beside him like they'd never been apart. Sometimes Benji brought a toy. Once it was a Nerf football, another time a beat-up baseball mitt. The shoes stopped piling up, but Scout still made his rounds. It was like he wanted to be sure everyone on Maple Hollow was okay. One Saturday, as we sat in our usual spot, Benji pointed to a high-top sneaker that had somehow made it to the top of the pile. "That one was mine," he said. I looked at it more closely. Faded red, with a bit of duct tape holding the toe together. I remembered seeing that shoe in the clearing a few weeks back, but hadn't thought twice about it. Scout took it from our porch. I didn't even realize until I saw it here again. "Guess he thought it belonged here more," I said. Benji gave a small smile. "I used to wear those when Mom and I would go on walks. She said I looked like a little explorer." Scout nudged his shoulder gently. Benji reached over and scratched behind his ears, more confident now, like the barrier between them had finally melted. Over the following days, the story started spreading. I didn't tell it myself, but Rachel probably did. Or Helen. Maybe even Officer Dave. One by one, neighbors started stopping me on the street, asking if it was true. If Scout had really built a hiding spot full of memories. If the boy was really back. I didn't give many details, just nodded and said, "Scout's always had a good heart." The cul-de-sac started changing in quiet, subtle ways. People began leaving things out on purpose. A sneaker with a broken lace, a tiny pair of sparkly boots that had clearly been outgrown, even a purple crock that someone labeled with permanent marker for Scout's collection. Every time he took one, I followed him. And every time, he'd add it not to the pile, but to a new spot. A second nest, smaller, more deliberate. I didn't realize what he was doing until one day when Benji and I arrived, and he led us not to the old pile, but to the new one. This one wasn't a mess. It was arranged like an art piece. Shoes stood upright, some filled with leaves, others with feathers or twigs. Right in the center sat the red high top, cleaned, polished, laced up neatly. "He's building a memory garden," I murmured. Benji sat beside it, quiet. He reached for a leaf tucked inside a slipper and turned it over in his palm. "It's like he wants me to remember the good stuff," Benji said. "Not just the hospital and the sad days." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. Just sat with him. The next weekend, Benji brought something new. A notebook. Not one of those school ones either. A proper hardback journal, the kind with thick pages. He handed it to me without a word. "You want me to... Can you help me write stuff down? I'm not good with words yet, but I want to remember everything Scout did for Mom." I nodded. We opened to the first page. I handed him a pen, but he shook his head. "You start. Just write what today looked like." So I wrote, "Scout brought us to the memory garden. The red shoe was in the center. Benji found a yellow leaf shaped like a heart. The trees were quiet today, like they were listening. And we kept going. Every week we added more entries. What Scout brought, what we talked about, what the weather felt like. Some pages were short, some stretched on. After a while, Benji started writing too. His handwriting was crooked, but proud. One day he wrote, "Scout helped me feel safe again." The neighborhood noticed changes too. I saw people slowing down when they walked past my house, hoping to catch a glimpse of Scout. Kids started leaving him treats. Even teenagers who normally stayed glued to their phones began taking part. A group of them asked if they could help build benches near the clearing. I said yes. They came with planks, tools, and the kind of clumsy energy only teenagers have. Soon, we had 3 wooden benches arranged around the memory garden. They weren't perfect. One leaned slightly to the left, but they were sturdy and filled with care. One afternoon, Helen Davis brought cookies and asked if she could sit with us. She had a photograph of her husband tucked in her coat pocket. He'd passed the year before. She said sitting by the shoes made her feel like she was surrounded by people again. And she wasn't the only one. Scout had built something bigger than I ever imagined. A sanctuary. Then came the local paper. Someone tipped off the editor. A young woman named Katie showed up one morning with a camera and a notebook. She wore hiking boots and a North Face jacket, clearly expecting a scenic trail, not a golden retriever with a shoe obsession. Scout, being Scout, walked right up and dropped an old flip-flop at her feet. "Is this my welcome gift?" she asked, laughing. "If it is, it's a good sign," I said. She took pictures of the clearing, the shoes, even the journal, with Benji's permission, of course. He didn't talk much during the interview, But he sat close to Scout the whole time, one hand always resting on his back. The article came out the next Sunday. The headline read, "Golden Retriever Turns Shoe Thefts into Healing Ritual." People loved it, and soon it wasn't just our neighbors showing up. Folks from nearby towns started visiting. Some brought their own shoes to donate. Others came to see the spot and sit quietly. Some left notes inside the shoes. Little messages of love, loss, and hope. Scout greeted every visitor the same way. A sniff, a wag, a look that said, "You're welcome here." I thought things had peaked, that this was the heart of the story. But I was wrong. One morning, Benji didn't show. Scout waited. He sat at the edge of the clearing, eyes on the trees, ears perked. We stayed there until sunset. No sign of Benji. The next day, I walked to the old woman's house, the grandmother. Her name was Linda, though I hadn't spoken with her much. She looked tired when she opened the door. "Benji's got the flu," she said. "Not serious, just wiped out. He asked about Scout, though." "Tell him we're thinking about him," I said. Scout and I still visited the clearing each morning. He didn't bring shoes anymore. Instead, he brought twigs, feathers, and one time even a tiny pine cone. He arranged them carefully, like he was saving a place. After a few days, I noticed something new. A shoe was missing. The red high top. At first I thought maybe someone had taken it, maybe a visitor who didn't realize it was part of something special. But then, on the 5th day, we arrived to find it back, polished again, sitting in the center. And beside it was a new note. "Thank you, Scout. I'm better now." Scout sniffed the note, then lay down beside it. Benji returned the next Saturday, looking tired but smiling. He didn't say much, just handed me a new page for the journal. I read it silently. Even when I was sick, I felt like Scout was near me. I dreamed he was bringing me things, like memories, like pieces of Mom. Maybe dogs know more than we think. I added it to the journal. More people came. A retired teacher from 2 towns over. A woman with a cane who left a single ballet flat. One man left his father's work boots and just stood in silence before walking away. The garden grew slowly, carefully, not in clutter, but in meaning. And Scout, with his wagging tail and soft eyes, was the guide. This wasn't just a pile of shoes anymore. It was a story being written by paw prints and shoelaces. And the story wasn't close to ending yet. Scout had a new routine now. Every morning, just after sunrise, he'd press his nose to the back door and give a soft, almost polite bark. I didn't need an alarm clock anymore. I'd throw on my jacket, grab the notebook, and we'd make our way through the misty woods together. The air always felt fresher in those early hours, especially during late autumn. Leaves crunched under our feet, and the world seemed quieter, like it was listening for something. Scout didn't rush. He took his time, sniffing the path, pausing now and then to glance back at me, as if making sure I was keeping up. The memory garden had changed again. Not in a dramatic way, but you could tell someone had been tending to it. A few of the older shoes had been gently cleaned, some leaves swept away. A tiny wooden sign had been staked near the front. Nothing flashy, just carved letters that read, "Scout's Garden." I didn't ask who made it. I didn't need to. Benji had started coming after school. Some days he brought homework, other days just himself. He never asked to talk about his mom. But I noticed the way he looked at the red high top every time he arrived. Like it was a lighthouse. Something to steer by. He began drawing in the journal now, not just writing. Little sketches of Scout, of shoes, of trees and squirrels and birds. His style was simple, but you could tell it came from somewhere deep. One day he showed me a full-page drawing of his mom holding baby Scout. "This is from the picture he saved," he said. He remembered her. I wanted to remember too. Scout nosed the page gently, then gave a low, happy woof that echoed just enough to make Benji smile. That same week, something unexpected happened. A package arrived on my porch, no return address. Inside was a shoe, a worn leather loafer, the kind your grandfather might have worn to church. Tucked inside was a note. "I read about Scout in the paper. This belonged to my dad. He would have loved your garden." I read the note 3 times, then brought the shoe to the clearing the next morning. Scout took it in his mouth like it was a treasure, gently, almost reverently. He walked to the center of the garden and placed it beside the red high top. Then he stepped back, turned in a slow circle, and lay down. After that, the packages kept coming. Boots, slippers, moccasins, sandals, all with notes, all telling small pieces of a person's story. These belonged to my sister. My son wore these at graduation. These were my mom's favorite gardening shoes. Some came from a few towns over, some from across the state. People weren't just dropping off shoes now. They were trusting Scout with their memories. Somehow, they knew he'd honor them. Benji and I started cataloging them, not in any formal way, just entries in the journal. Tuesday, blue canvas sneaker, belonged to a teacher named Mr. Hawthorne, worn at his retirement party. Thursday, hiking boot with red laces, sent by a woman who hiked the Appalachian Trail with her dad. We added pictures when we could. Some senders included them, some didn't, but we recorded them all. One day, while adding a new pair of well-worn ballet flats, Scout did something he hadn't done before. He stood perfectly still, staring at the tree line. His ears perked, tail low but wagging. I turned to see a man standing just beyond the clearing. Middle-aged, tall, with weathered hands and a flannel jacket. He looked nervous, unsure if he was welcome. "You can come in," I said, stepping forward. "Scout already says yes." The man laughed quietly and walked in. He was holding a shoebox. Inside was a single baby shoe, barely the size of my palm. "She never got to wear the second one," he said, his voice breaking just slightly. But I thought maybe here, it could mean something. Scout approached slowly, took the tiny shoe gently, and carried it to the edge of the garden. He set it down beside a child's rain boot someone else had donated weeks ago. Then he sat beside it. The man stayed a long time, didn't speak much, just sat and watched the trees. When he left, he patted Scout's head and whispered, "Thank you." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was upset, but because I couldn't stop thinking about what this had become. A dog who collected shoes had turned into something so much more. People were healing in these woods. People were remembering. Benji asked me once if we should get a proper plaque made, something more official. I said maybe, but I also said I didn't think Scout cared about plaques. He just cared about the visits. The weather started turning colder. Scout's fur thickened, and he spent more time curled up by the fireplace after our morning treks. Benji began bringing a thermos of hot chocolate. We shared sandwiches, sometimes just peanut butter and jelly, sitting on the benches watching the leaves fall. More shoes came. Some left by hand, others mailed in. One day, Someone donated a pair of shiny black tap shoes. Scout immediately placed them under the big pine tree, like they were especially important. We started calling that area the stage. It became a bit of a game. Kids would visit the garden with their parents and walk around guessing what kind of person wore each shoe. Was this the shoe of a dancer, a mailman, a soldier? Scout loved it. He followed the kids from shoe to shoe, tail wagging. He was proud, I could tell, like he'd curated it all just for them. Then winter arrived. Not all at once, just a few flurries, a brisk wind, the kind of weather that made you think about scarves and firewood. I worried people might stop coming, that maybe the cold would chase away the magic. But they kept coming. Some came with snow boots to donate. Others just came to sit for a while, bundled in coats, sipping from thermoses. The memory garden, now lightly dusted with snow, looked more peaceful than ever. Benji built a bird feeder near the benches, a simple wooden one he made with his grandmother. Birds came often, cardinals mostly. One morning, 3 landed on the same branch, right above the red high top. Benji whispered, "That means she's watching." Scout barked once, softly, then rested his head on Benji's shoe. Around mid-December, we got an unexpected visit. A local veterans group had read the story. A few of them came by, dressed in old uniforms, each carrying a pair of combat boots. One of them knelt by the garden and saluted. I don't think I've ever seen Scout sit so still. After they left, Benji and I sat for a long time. "Do you think Scout knows what all these shoes mean?" he asked. I thought about it. I looked at Scout, lying beside the baby shoe, tail curled over his paws. I think he knows they matter, and I think that's enough. We added another journal entry. Saturday. Scout received 3 pairs of boots. One had a medal tucked inside. A visitor left a note that read, "He wore these in peace and war. He danced in them at his wedding. Now he can rest." We didn't know who left it, but we added it to the book. More benches appeared. Someone had left a folded blanket over one, a gesture for the cold. Others brought candles in jars. They stayed lit even in the wind. This wasn't just a clearing anymore. It was a place of memory, yes, but also a place of warmth. Scout led us there, one shoe at a time. And he wasn't done yet. The first true snowfall blanketed the woods on a Friday morning, thick enough that Scout had to bound like a deer through the drifts just to make progress. I followed behind, boots crunching, breath visible in the crisp air. The woods were silent, except for the occasional flutter of snow dropping from branches. The world felt paused, like it was holding its breath. When we reached the memory garden, I stopped short. It looked like a dream. Each shoe, boot, slipper, whatever had been left, was now half submerged in soft white. Some had only their tips poking through. Others formed small hills with snow curled over them like frosting. The sign that said Scout's Garden had a cap of snow on top, and the benches had little frozen seats, untouched. Scout stood at the edge, tail wagging slowly, like he was showing it off. Benji arrived minutes later, wrapped in 3 layers, and carrying a metal thermos tucked under his arm. He didn't speak right away, just stood there and looked. "Looks like the shoes are sleeping," he said finally. Scout walked over to him and leaned against his leg. We brushed snow off the bench and sat, sipping hot chocolate and watching the stillness. It wasn't long before I noticed the footprints, small ones, boot prints, more than one set. Someone had come before us, early, maybe even in the night. Tucked gently among the shoes was something new. A pair of ice skates, old-fashioned, the leather cracking at the seams, the blades dulled. A note was wedged into one boot, weighed down by a small stone. Benji carefully unfolded it. Skated every winter with my brother on Thompson Lake. He's gone now, but I think he'd like to keep gliding here. Benji folded it and passed it to me. I tucked it in the journal. We stayed longer than usual that day. Something about the cold made it harder to leave. I didn't want the shoes to be alone in the snow. But Scout didn't seem worried. He walked around the clearing, inspecting each gift like he was making sure they were okay. When we finally turned to go, he gave one last look over his shoulder. That weekend, I got a knock at the door. It was Helen Davis, cheeks pink from the wind, holding a small wooden crate. "I thought maybe Scout could use a little help," she said, pushing the box into my arms. Inside were socks. Dozens of mismatched, colorful, woolly socks. Some hand-knit, others clearly salvaged from long-forgotten drawers. "He doesn't take only shoes," she said, chuckling. So I thought, why not socks? They have stories, too. The next day, we added the first pair to the garden. Scout picked out a green and yellow one and carried it proudly to the top of a boot, setting it there like a flag. It was a small addition, but it changed everything. People caught on quickly. Scarves came next, mittens, even a few knit hats. It was like the community was warming up the memory garden piece by piece, not just for Scout, not even for the people who came, but for the ones they'd lost. That week, we received a package from Montana. Inside was a single cowboy boot and a carefully folded bandana. The letter said, "He never left the ranch without these. Thank you for giving him a new trail to walk." Benji read it aloud, then sat quietly for a long time. I saw his breath catch in the air. Scout nuzzled into his side. "He's helping people say goodbye," Benji said. Or maybe helping them say hello again. I didn't know which it was. Maybe both. As the weeks passed, something else started to change. The garden wasn't just for remembering now. It was for sharing. People started writing to us, not just stories, but questions. Could they visit? Could they bring groups? Could they volunteer to help keep it clean in the spring? One teacher from a nearby elementary school asked if she could bring her class to leave shoes from a school fundraiser. They'd written notes to go with each pair, thanking someone they'd lost or someone they admired. When they arrived, 22 kids in puffed-up coats and squeaky boots, Scout was ready. He trotted from group to group, tail sweeping the snow like a broom. The kids adored him. A boy knelt beside him and whispered, "This shoe is for my grandpa," as he placed a tiny loafer at the garden's edge. Scout licked his face and laid down beside the gift. The teacher pulled me aside later. "I've never seen them so quiet. It's like they knew this was something bigger." I nodded. They were right. We added a new section to the journal that day. Drawings by the kids taped in with care. One showed Scout with angel wings standing on a pile of shoes. Another had him curled up beside a fireplace, surrounded by smiling stick figures. Benji looked through them slowly. They see him like I do. Right around New Year's, we got another surprise. Scout had always been healthy. Strong, a little lazy sometimes, sure, but never sick. But that morning he was slow to get up. His tail wagged, but without energy. He ate half his breakfast, then lay down again, head resting on his paws. I canceled my plans. We stayed home that day. Benji came by in the afternoon, worried. Scout perked up when he saw him, managed to get up and walk to the door. "Maybe he's just tired," Benji said. "Could be the cold," I added. But deep down, I was scared. We took him to the vet the next morning. Mild arthritis, they said. Nothing serious. Just the signs of age catching up. He'd need rest, supplements, fewer long walks in the cold. It hit me harder than I expected. I'd always known Scout wasn't a puppy anymore, but watching him sleep that night, curled up by the fire, his breathing slow and steady, it made everything feel more fragile. The next day, I told Benji we'd need to adjust. Maybe come every other day instead of every day. He nodded. Then he surprised me. "I can take him," he said. "I mean, I know the path. He trusts me. And Grandma said it's fine if I go after school, just not too late." I stared at him. "You want to take Scout on your own?" He shrugged. "I think he wants me to." We tried it the next day. I followed them at a distance, just to be sure. Scout moved slower, but steady. Benji didn't rush him. They stopped often, and Scout let him lead. When they returned, Scout lay at Benji's feet and fell asleep. "You two are quite the team," I said. Benji smiled. "He knows what he's doing. I'm just the assistant." More and more, Benji took the lead. He started answering some of the letters we got, adding his own notes to the journal. People responded to him. They saw something in him, maybe the gentleness, maybe the strength that had grown in the quiet spaces between grief and joy. And Scout? He watched it all with that steady calm he always had. A few days later, a delivery van pulled into the driveway. The driver handed me a large wooden crate. "This came with a letter," he said. Said it was important. Inside was a handcrafted bench. Carved into the backrest were dozens of tiny shoes. Some were simple outlines. Others had names etched in. And in the center, one single name: Scout. The letter said, "For the dog who helped us walk through sorrow, for the boy who helped him carry it." We placed it at the clearing's edge. Scout lay beside it for nearly an hour. That night, as the snow fell again, I sat on the porch with Benji. We didn't speak for a long time. When we finally did, he said, "I think the garden's going to grow in spring." I nodded. "I think so too." Scout snored softly at our feet. And the world felt right. By February, the snowbanks along Maple Hollow Drive had grown tall enough to hide full mailboxes, and the only sound most days was the scraping of shovels and the low rumble of plow trucks. But Scout still woke up every morning with that same look in his eyes. The one that said, "It's time." We bundled up with scarves wrapped over our noses, boots layered with extra socks, and thermoses filled with warm cider. Scout's steps had slowed even more, but he made them count. He didn't limp, he strode, with purpose, like every paw print was a message he was leaving behind. Benji had started taking over more than just the walks. He brought a second journal, his own, where he sketched not just what he saw at the garden, but what he felt. Pages filled with drawings of Scout in motion, visitors leaving notes, birds perched on boots, and even tiny poems he wouldn't let me read just yet. "I'll share them when they're finished," he said, clutching the notebook like it was a secret treasure. He was changing in ways I hadn't expected. His posture more confident, his voice firmer. He still laughed when Scout rolled in the snow or when a squirrel made him bark like mad. But there was something more grounded in him now, a calm I hadn't seen in many kids his age. Scout still knew which shoes mattered most. He always lingered by the new arrivals, sniffing them carefully, sometimes nudging them gently into a more fitting place. One morning, He took a hand-knitted baby sock from a small wicker basket someone had left, carried it to the middle of the garden, and tucked it beside the cowboy boot from Montana. I don't know why, but somehow it made perfect sense. On Valentine's Day, we found heart-shaped paper notes tucked into several shoes. No names, just short messages. You taught me kindness again. I forgive you. You'd love this dog. Benji read them all aloud in a soft voice, like they were prayers. Scout sat at attention the whole time, tail gently swishing against the snow. We added a new page in the journal titled, "The Day of Red Notes." That same afternoon, we saw our first visitor from out of state. She'd driven up from Connecticut. Her name was Jane, a retired nurse with a soft voice and bright blue eyes that never quite stopped moving, like she was always scanning a patient chart in her mind. She brought a box with 4 shoes inside. None of them matched. "These belonged to my patients," she said. "Ones I got to know during long stays. I saved 1 shoe from each after they passed. I didn't know why at the time. Now I do." Scout approached slowly, his movements careful. He sniffed each shoe, then picked up the smallest one, an orthopedic slipper, and carried it to the tree line. He placed it beneath a thick birch and lay beside it. Jean wiped her eyes. "He's telling me something, isn't he?" "He always is," I said. After she left, Benji added her shoes to the registry in the main journal. He gave them their own page. At the top, in his now steady hand, he wrote, "They helped others walk. Now they walk with us." That night, he stayed over at my place. His grandmother had a bad cold and didn't want him catching it. We camped out in the living room with Scout between us, the fire crackling low. "Do you think Scout ever wonders why people bring him these things?" Benji asked, staring at the flickering light. "I think he knows they're not just things. He understands more than we think. Maybe more than we do." Scout sighed, heavy and warm, and nudged his head against Benji's foot. The next morning brought a surprise. A group of college students showed up at the garden, bundled in mismatched coats and holding a banner made of stitched-together scarves. It read, "Thank you, Scout." They explained they'd seen the article, then the follow-up photos online. One of them, a girl named Amy, was studying grief therapy and wanted to write a paper about Scout's garden. She asked if she could observe a few sessions, maybe talk to some visitors. Benji agreed on the condition that she didn't interfere. "Scout's the one people come for," he said. "Not interviews." Amy respected that. She returned 3 more times that month, always staying quiet, always writing quickly in her notebook. Once, she gave Scout a biscuit shaped like a shoe. He didn't eat it. He buried it behind the bench. March came with wind and promise. The snow began to melt. Little patches of brown poked through the white. The shoes that had been buried for months were now visible again, their colors faded slightly but still vibrant in meaning. Scout started walking slower. He rested more at the garden. Sometimes he didn't do his full loop around the circle. He'd find a spot near the bench and just watch. Benji took on the walking, collecting, placing. People now came specifically to meet him. "You're the boy from the story," one man said. "The one Scout chose." Benji just nodded. We started keeping an old shoebox filled with blank paper and pencils near the entrance of the clearing. Visitors left notes, folded drawings, and even photographs. One day, a little girl left a glittery card that simply read, "Thank you for loving everyone." Scout sniffed it and then carried it to the center of the clearing. He didn't place it in a shoe. He let it rest on the ground, weighted down with a pine cone. The garden kept growing, but now it had little side paths, spots people had naturally created as they wandered. Someone brought smooth stepping stones and arranged them in a spiral. Others added birdhouses. One visitor left a snow globe on a stump. Another planted crocus bulbs around the base of the benches. One warm afternoon, Benji leaned back against the new bench with a content sigh. When the flowers come up, it's going to look like a painting. Scout dozed beside him, chin resting on his paws. That evening, we held the first memory walk. It wasn't organized or announced. It just happened. A few of us neighbors, maybe 10 or so, gathered at sunset and quietly walked to the clearing together. Each brought something: a shoe, a scarf, a note. We didn't speak much. We placed our items, we looked around, we nodded at each other. Benji and Scout led the way. The moon was high when we left. I looked back once and saw Scout standing in the center of the garden, the wind tugging gently at his fur. He looked like he was standing guard. The next day, Benji showed me something new. He'd made a map, a full layout of the garden, sketched carefully with little icons for each kind of item. This is the north bench, and over here, the baby shoes. This patch is where the teacher shoes are, and this path, that's where Scout likes to walk the slowest. He held it up proudly. I think someday people might want to know what everything meant. This way, they can find the story. I felt a lump in my throat, but didn't say anything, just rested my hand on his shoulder. The next weekend, we got a new kind of visitor, a man in a business suit, clearly not from town, holding a leather satchel and a tablet. He introduced himself as Mark, said he worked for a non-profit that funded animal-assisted therapy programs. He'd read about Scout and wanted to talk about a possible feature. Benji eyed him suspiciously. "Is this for Scout's sake or yours?" Mark paused. "A little of both, maybe, but mostly his. What he's done here is special. I think others need to know." We told him he could walk the garden, but no filming, no photos. Just see it. He stayed longer than expected. When he left, he handed me a folded note. "Your dog made me cry today. I haven't cried in 15 years. I didn't know I needed to." I showed it to Benji. He added it to the journal. Scout's steps had become careful now, each one slow and measured. But his eyes were bright. Every day, when he saw Benji, he lit up like a lamp. One morning, I woke up to find Benji already sitting on the porch, Scout curled at his feet. "We didn't want to wait," he said. He wanted to come early. We walked the path together. No words needed. The frost was light. The air was clean. When we reached the clearing, Scout went straight to the center and lay down among the shoes. Benji sat beside him. I sat on the bench. A crow called from the trees. The shoes waited, silent, but full of voices. And we stayed, just like that, for as long as the morning would let us. The thaw came slowly, as if the earth wasn't quite sure it was ready to let go of the snow. Patches of green appeared in the yard, like little secrets revealed after a long silence. Birds returned, louder and more confident each day, and somewhere deep in the woods, the stream behind the garden started singing again. Scout still woke early, but he no longer barked. He just sat by the back door and waited. When I came downstairs, he would lift his head and thump his tail once or twice on the floor. No urgency in him, only readiness. Benji arrived minutes later, the same way he did every morning now. His hair was longer, curling slightly over his ears, and he had that look some boys get when they grow into themselves quietly, without anyone noticing until one day, they just stand a little taller. He knelt, and gently fastened Scout's collar. "Ready, old friend?" Scout gave a low, satisfied breath and stood. We made our way down the trail that had once been barely visible, but now was worn smooth by 1,000 steps. The last of the ice had melted from the shaded parts, and thin ribbons of mud traced the path like veins. The memory garden had changed again. Spring was peeking in from every edge. Tiny purple crocuses pushed up between boots and slippers, delicate and bright. Patches of daffodils, likely planted by unseen hands, had started to bloom near the benches. There were new notes tucked carefully inside shoes, poems written on scraps of newspaper, feathers left like bookmarks between shoelaces. Scout took it all in with one sweeping gaze before walking to the bench. He sat and watched like a curator inspecting the day's offerings. Benji pulled the journal from his backpack and started sketching. His pencil moved fast and sure, capturing the way the crocus petals leaned toward the sun. We sat for a while, the three of us. The birds chirped, the trees creaked gently, and the wind carried the faint scent of warming earth. Then Scout rose, walked to a pair of ballet flats half buried in leaves, and nudged one of them until a beetle scurried out. He didn't chase it, he just watched it go. "Do you think he remembers every single shoe?" Benji asked. I thought about it. I think he remembers the people, or the feeling behind each gift. Maybe the stories linger in the leather. Scout circled back to us and lay down, his tail sweeping across the mossy ground. Later that week, we met someone new. An older man with a wide-brimmed hat, walking with a cane carved from driftwood. He introduced himself as Martin, said he'd driven 6 hours just to find the place. "I heard about Scout's garden from my niece. I lost my wife last summer, 42 years. We used to walk our dog through an orchard near our house, just like this." He carried a pair of gardening clogs, faded blue, a little frayed around the edges. "She wore these every day, even in the snow. She said they helped her feel rooted." Scout approached slowly. He sniffed the clogs, then did something rare. He sat beside Martin and stayed there, unmoving, until the man's hand came down gently on his back. "She would have liked you," Martin said. "She loved dogs who listened more than they barked." Benji wrote a new journal entry. Tuesday, Martin came with blue clogs. Scout stayed still for 10 whole minutes. It felt like time paused just for them. The daffodils opened wider today. As the garden continued to bloom, more people came, not always with shoes, sometimes with books or songs or just silence. A woman brought a hand-sewn doll. A boy left a baseball glove. One family brought a picnic and stayed for hours, eating quietly and watching Scout nap in the sun. People didn't ask for explanations anymore. They understood without needing one. Scout had become more than a symbol. He was a rhythm, a gentle constant in a world that often felt too fast, too loud. He wasn't chasing squirrels anymore. He wasn't digging holes, but he was still teaching. One Thursday afternoon, the sky shifted fast. The wind picked up, clouds stacked into towers, and the first drops of rain hit just as we reached the clearing. Scout hesitated, then trotted to the center of the garden. He stood tall for a moment, head high, rain soaking into his coat. Benji and I stood under the trees. The rain didn't frighten Scout. He waited, then sat, then lay down. We watched as the rain washed over the shoes, cleaning them in a way that felt like ceremony. The wind bent the daffodils without breaking them. Benji whispered, "It's like he wanted to see them shine." When we left, Scout was soaked but proud. That weekend, the family from 2 streets over brought something extraordinary. A pair of red roller skates, scuffed and worn, with neon green laces. Their teenage son had passed away the year before in an accident. These were his. "I wasn't sure about letting go of them," the father said, "but something told me this is where they belong now." Scout sniffed them, then walked a slow circle around the garden before nudging the roller skates to the edge of the path. "We'll make them part of the entrance," Benji said. We placed them where the trail opened into the clearing. They stood like gatekeepers, bright, brave, full of memory. Scout sat beside them and didn't move for the longest time. That night I got a call from Linda, Benji's grandmother. She said he'd been quieter than usual, thoughtful, but not upset. I told her that sometimes the garden made all of us quiet. "He's been drawing all evening," she said, page after page. "I think something's stirring." The next morning, Benji arrived with a rolled-up poster. "It's for Scout," he said. "I want to hang it in the tree." We carried it carefully through the woods. At the clearing, Benji picked the wide oak near the benches and used twine to secure the poster. It was a full-color drawing. A winding path through the woods. Scout standing in the center of the garden. Shoes glowing faintly around him, like fireflies. Above him, the sky was filled with soft outlines, people, animals, memories, woven into the clouds. At the bottom, in hand-printed letters, it read, "This is where the stories rest." Scout sniffed the poster, then laid down beneath it. We didn't speak for a while. Then Benji opened the journal and wrote, "Today, the garden got a sky." A few days later, something remarkable happened. A woman named Susan arrived with a camera crew, not for a news piece, but for a documentary. "We want to explore places that show how animals bring people together. This is extraordinary." We were hesitant. We'd turned down others before, but this time felt different. Susan spoke softly. She asked permission. She asked Benji. He looked at Scout, then nodded. They filmed over the next 2 days, quietly, respectfully. They didn't ask questions while people visited. They just captured the wind, the light, the careful way Scout moved through the garden. On the second evening, Susan returned alone. She brought a pair of worn hiking boots. "My brothers," she said. "We hiked through Yellowstone together the year before he passed. I kept these for some reason. Now I know why." Scout took the boots and placed them near the stream behind the garden. That night, Benji wrote, "Susan came with her brother's boots. Scout gave them water." April came with more sun than clouds, and the garden began humming. Bees drifted lazily from bloom to bloom. Grass filled in the muddy patches. The shoes didn't look like clutter anymore. They looked like part of the landscape. Benji brought a wind chime shaped like tiny bells and hung it near the poster. When the breeze picked up, it sang a soft, high sound that made Scout lift his head and wag once. That day, a young couple brought their newborn baby to the garden. They didn't leave a shoe. They didn't say much. They just stood with the stroller under the oak tree. The baby cooed once. Scout walked over, sniffed the air, and sat down beside them. "He's blessing her," the mother whispered. Benji added one more line to the journal. "Today, someone came with no memories yet, and left with all of ours." The garden, once a curious pile of stolen shoes, had become something sacred, and Scout, our steady guide, was still leading us forward, one paw print at a time. By mid-April, the trail to the garden felt more like a gentle hallway than a woodland path. The trees had begun to leaf out, giving the sunlight a dappled quality, like someone had cut little windows into the sky. Birds chirped so insistently it sometimes felt like they were competing with one another, and the stream behind the garden flowed more confidently now, gurgling like it had stories of its own to tell. Scout's steps were slower still, and I'd begun bringing a padded mat for him to rest on once we reached the clearing. Benji carried it for him without needing to be asked. He always said Scout earned the right to be carried in every way that mattered. On this particular morning, Scout paused halfway down the trail and sat. Not in distress, he didn't whimper or huff, but with an almost deliberate calm. He looked ahead, then behind, then up through the trees. Benji stopped beside him, resting a hand on his back. "You okay, buddy?" Scout didn't move. We waited with him. Sometimes he needed moments like that, moments to let the wind talk to him, or maybe to remember something only he could. After a while, he stood again and continued, his tail giving one steady wag. When we reached the clearing, he walked not to the bench or the mat, but directly to a small child's shoe that had fallen sideways in the night. He gently nudged it back into place, and then lay beside it. That day, a new family arrived. 2 parents and their daughter, maybe 5 years old, wearing a bright yellow dress and red boots. The little girl clutched a worn sneaker in her hand, like it was a teddy bear. "This was my brother's," she told us without hesitation. "He went to heaven last year." Benji knelt beside her. "Would you like to leave it somewhere special?" She looked around the garden with wide eyes, then walked straight to a patch of sun near the roller skates at the entrance. She placed the sneaker down and kissed it. Scout didn't rise, but he watched her the whole time. Her parents stayed back, letting her lead. The mother whispered, "She's talked about this garden for weeks since we saw the article." She asked if her brother could have a friend here. Benji drew her brother's sneaker in the journal later that afternoon. The sketch had the laces forming a heart. The wind chime by the oak tree jingled as we wrote. That week, we had more visitors than ever before. Word had spread beyond the county, even beyond the state. A young man from Wisconsin brought a pair of snow boots with silver duct tape around the toes. "He wore these every single day, even in summer," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He was stubborn that way." A woman named Elise brought shoes from all 3 of her children. They were alive and well, she explained, but grown and far away. "I just want them to know their stories are still part of me." She placed the 3 pairs, baby sneakers, muddy soccer cleats, and a polished black dress shoe, side by side. Scout circled each one and lay down facing them, as if guarding the passage of time. One morning, a boy arrived alone. Maybe 11 or 12, same age as Benji, but with a quiet sadness etched into every movement. He didn't say much. He brought one flip-flop and laid it carefully beneath a tree. Benji approached him gently. "Whose was it?" The boy stared at the shoe. "My dad's. It's the only thing I kept." He didn't stay long, but when he left, he turned and waved. Scout gave a low, content bark in reply. After he was gone, Benji and I added a note beside the flip-flop. Just a line of handwriting that read, "For all the ones who leave behind just enough." Benji's own drawings had evolved. He began using colored pencils. Some of the pages now showed the garden in different seasons: winter whites, spring greens, golden sunsets. He drew Scout in the center of every scene, a a constant. We brought an umbrella one day and set it up near the bench to give Scout extra shade. He seemed to appreciate it. He rested longer in the afternoons, sometimes with his nose tucked beneath a worn slipper, sometimes watching the birds hop between shoes like tourists on a scavenger hunt. The crocuses were fading now, but in their place came bluebells and a few wild tulips. Flowers had a rhythm in the garden. Each season offered its own chorus. Benji's grandmother began knitting tiny flags in soft pastel colors, which she gave us to mark new additions. We'd place a flag beside each new shoe or item for a few days, signaling its arrival like a warm welcome. One flag flew next to a tiny orthopedic baby boot that had arrived with no note, just the boot and a small angel pin attached to the laces. We named that area the Quiet Corner. More benches appeared. Not all store-bought. Some were handmade, carved from fallen logs or old pallets. People left cushions wrapped in plastic, waterproof notepads, even small jars of honey or jam. A man left a mason jar filled with marbles. "These were my sister's collection," he said. "She counted them every night, said they kept her dreams in order." Scout laid next to the jar until the man left. Then he nosed it gently and gave it one soft paw pat. Visitors began sending letters addressed to Scout, Maple Hollow Garden. The post office clerk told me they set aside a bin just for him. I'd pick them up twice a week. Some were short. "Thank you for remembering." Some were longer. "I came here broken. I left with something I didn't know I'd lost. Peace." We read each one aloud, even if Scout was asleep. Benji said he heard them anyway. One day, we received a small package with a silver key inside. No note. No name. Just the key. Benji looked at me and said, "Let's bury it." We placed it beneath a patch of moss and marked it with a smooth stone. On it, Benji drew a single shoe. He added a journal entry. "Some doors only need to be opened once." Scout's naps grew longer, but he still woke up each time someone new entered the clearing. He no longer trotted. He walked slowly, carefully, and with deep purpose. One paw at a time. When he reached a new item, he would sit for a while, sometimes even resting his chin beside it. Visitors always paused when they saw that. Some cried, some smiled. A few simply sat with him, sharing the silence. We started preparing for May. There was talk of hosting a community day, not a ceremony, not a festival, just a day for everyone who'd ever visited to return. To walk the trail together, to place new shoes, to see how the garden had grown. Benji made flyers and gave them to the post office, the bakery, and the library. We didn't call it an event. We called it Scout's Day. Scout seemed to understand. Each time we mentioned it, his ears perked up. He wagged his tail like someone had promised him a walk and a peanut butter biscuit. The day before, we cleaned the trail. A group of teenagers from the high school came to help, raking leaves and clearing debris. One of them built a small wooden arch for the entrance and hung shoes from the top. Small ones, colorful ones. It looked like a curtain of stories. That night, as we packed up to head home, Benji knelt beside Scout. "You did good, old boy." Scout licked his hand once and rested his head on Benji's foot. The next morning, the trail was full before we even arrived. People walked slowly, in pairs or small groups, holding hands or shoulders, or silence. Some brought boxes, some brought photos, Some brought nothing but themselves. At the garden, everything felt still and alive all at once. The shoes shone in the sunlight. The flowers swayed. The air hummed. Scout walked the perimeter once. Just once. Then he lay beneath the oak tree near Benji's poster and stayed there, watching. People placed new items in waves, some with ceremony, some with quick, trembling hands. There was no schedule, no speeches, just one long, beautiful unfolding of memory and love. Benji stood beside Scout almost the entire time, notebook in hand, sketching, writing, greeting. And Scout never once looked away from the people. When the sun began to dip, the last visitor, a little boy no older than 4, walked up with a pair of mismatched rain boots. He set them gently in the center and turned to wave. Scout wagged his tail once, then closed his eyes for a nap. Benji wrote one sentence that night. Scout's day was made of everything we've ever loved. The garden breathed, and the stories kept walking in. The week after Scout's day, the woods around Maple Hollow felt different. Not quieter, but fuller, like all the footsteps that had passed through the trail had left behind something invisible, but real. The birds seemed louder in the morning. The air carried more warmth, and the garden had grown not just in size, but in presence, like it had decided to step into its own kind of life. Scout's pace had slowed again. Now he stopped twice on the way to the clearing. Not out of pain, just a need to rest. He didn't seem frustrated by it, he seemed content. He'd sit, glance around at the trees, then look at us like he was saying, "We're still moving. That's what matters." Benji had started using a small wagon with a folded towel inside. Scout didn't protest when we lifted him into it for the final stretch. In fact, he looked almost amused by the ride. He'd sit upright for the first few minutes, ears perked, then settle down with his chin on the edge as if watching a familiar film pass by. That morning when we arrived, we found something new at the garden entrance. A guest book. Not one we had put there. Someone else had done it. Handmade, with a wooden cover and thick paper. On the first page, it simply said, "If you've loved someone, right here." Benji flipped through the early entries. They were full of raw, quiet beauty. For my sister, who taught me to braid my own hair. For Dad, I still hear your laugh when it rains. To the dog who never left my side. People had signed with initials, with first names, with drawings, or dates, or just hearts. Benji added a pencil to the side of the book and wrote a new sign. "Take your time." We found a new place for the wagon beside the main bench, so Scout could be lifted out and lie on his mat in the shade. He still liked being part of the welcome. When visitors approached, he'd lift his head, give a single tail thump, and let them come to him. That afternoon, we met a man named Gary. He wore jeans that had seen 100 wash cycles and a baseball cap with a frayed logo on the front. He carried a paper bag and moved with the kind of slow precision that comes from loss. "These were my father's slippers," he said, taking out 2 soft brown house shoes. "He wore them every morning, even when he went out to get the mail." He placed them beneath a maple tree just off the main circle, then sat beside Scout and said nothing for a while. Eventually, he leaned forward and whispered, "He would have liked this place." Scout pressed his nose to Gary's knee and gave a short breath like agreement. Benji drew the slippers in the journal and labeled them. The ones that waited by the door. That evening, we noticed more tiny touches scattered through the garden. Someone had left a feather necklace on a bench. A child's drawing of a family with a golden dog was tucked under a stone. One shoe had a poem written right on its toe with black marker. Every path I take still hears your voice in shoe prints, worn but not gone. People were speaking through the garden now. It was a language without rules, but filled with feeling. Benji began photographing some of the messages, compiling them into a scrapbook he titled, "The Things That Found Us." Scout's presence had become something steadying. He didn't do much physically anymore, but people were drawn to him like gravity. Some knelt beside him and cried softly. Others told him stories. A few just sat nearby with their shoes in their laps, waiting until they were ready to let go. We started calling the area near the oak tree Scout's Corner. Someone carved a small wooden sign and mounted it on a post beside his mat. People began leaving small items specifically there: dog biscuits, hand-drawn paw prints, little tokens of thanks. One day, a woman in a red raincoat arrived during a drizzle. She had an umbrella tucked under her arm and a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. She didn't say much, but she moved with intent. She knelt beside Scout, placed a pair of tiny wedding shoes, delicate, ivory-colored, on the ground, and kissed her fingers before touching his head. "I never thought I'd find a place to put these," she said, her voice thick but sure. "They were going to be for our baby. We lost her before she ever took a step." Scout didn't move, but his eyes stayed open, watching her gently. The woman stood, nodded once, and walked away. Benji crouched beside the shoes and whispered, "She did take a step. Right here." Later, he drew the pair next to a sprouting flower and titled it, "Steps That Waited." Visitors now came with full journals of their own, sometimes sitting for hours under the trees, sketching, writing, just breathing in the quiet. A local artist painted a mural on a nearby tree trunk, a swirl of shoes turning into birds, lifting into the sky. At the top of the painting was Scout's face, not perfect, but unmistakably him, eyes kind and steady. We left a note at the base. "Thank you for seeing him." One Sunday, a music teacher brought her students to the garden. They didn't bring shoes. They brought instruments, quiet ones. A flute, a violin, a cello. They played for 20 minutes, soft, slow songs that drifted through the clearing like a breeze. Scout didn't move the entire time. His eyes stayed closed, but his ears twitched with every note. Afterward, Benji wrote in the journal, "Today, the shoes danced." That night, Linda came over for tea. She brought cinnamon bread and sat with us by the fire. "Benji said Scout's been sleeping more," she said. "Is he?" I nodded slowly. "He's slowing down, but he's not fading. Not yet, he's still giving." She looked into her mug. "I used to think healing was something you did alone, but that garden proves otherwise." Scout, resting by the hearth, gave a quiet snore that made us both smile. 2 days later, someone brought a memory box. It wasn't a shoe. It was a small wooden chest, filled with buttons, postcards, and old movie stubs. Tied to the handle was a note. "For my grandfather, who carried more than we ever knew." Scout sniffed the box, sat beside it, and then walked once around it like a ritual. We placed it near the edge of the clearing, where the crocuses had started blooming again. Benji gave it its own journal section. Boxes of more. People now brought candles to light at sunset. A local beekeeper left jars of honey. Someone hung prayer flags between 2 trees. One day, we found an old radio with a single cassette tape inside. Benji played it. It was a man singing lullabies in a deep, soft voice. We let it play until it clicked off on its own. Scout had a new favorite spot now, a small rise where he could see the whole garden. We'd help him up there, lay his mat, and he'd rest with his head up, eyes open just enough to track the people moving in and out. One afternoon, he lifted his head and gave a soft bark. We turned to see a young man approaching with something wrapped in a pillowcase. He knelt, unwrapped the bundle, and revealed a single soccer cleat. "He was my twin," the man said. "He scored the winning goal with this. I haven't touched it since the day he died." He placed it in the center, alone and proud. Scout stood, slowly, and walked to it. He touched it with his nose, circled it, then lay down beside it. Benji took a long time to draw that one. When he finally finished, he showed me. It was the cleat, shining slightly. Scout beside it, eyes closed, and above them both, 2 identical stars. He titled it, "2 Goals, 1 Keeper." That night, as Scout slept by the fire, I looked at Benji and said, "You think he knows how much he's done?" Benji nodded. "I think he's known since the first shoe." Outside, the wind shifted, and the garden waited, ready for whoever would come next. Scout woke before the birds on the last morning. He stood by the back door with a calm steadiness, not barking, not pacing, just waiting. When I walked into the kitchen, he turned his head toward me and wagged his tail once, slow and deliberate. The sun hadn't yet cleared the trees, but the sky was light enough to walk without a flashlight. The path to the garden was still dappled with dew, and every step squished gently beneath our boots. Benji met us halfway. He didn't speak, just rubbed Scout's ear, and walked with us the rest of the way in silence. We didn't use the wagon that morning. Scout wanted to walk it, every step. It took time, more than usual. He paused often, sometimes sitting, sometimes just looking around. But he didn't hesitate. He looked like a dog on a mission, like he knew this trail as well as he knew the sound of our voices. When we reached the clearing, the garden was alive with morning light. The shoes, now in the hundreds, glowed softly. Some had dew glistening on the laces. Others had been nudged by wind or squirrels, creating new angles, new patterns. The flowers around the perimeter had exploded in color over the last few days. Tulips, forget-me-nots, violets, wild hyacinths. The scent of earth and petals hung in the air. Scout walked to his favorite spot at the small rise overlooking the clearing. We helped him onto the mat. He lay down with a slow sigh, resting his head between his front paws, eyes wide and alert. Benji sat beside him and pulled out the journal. "I want to finish this today," he said quietly. "The last drawing, the last words." He opened to a blank page and began sketching. Visitors started arriving mid-morning, not a crowd, just a few at a time. An older couple with a picture frame. A teenage boy with a baseball cap full of pins. A woman in a wheelchair who handed Benji a shoe made entirely of folded newspaper. "He was a writer," she said. "I thought he'd appreciate the irony." Scout greeted each visitor with his eyes. He didn't get up, but he watched, and they knew he saw them. People came to him like they were approaching something sacred. They knelt. They whispered. They reached out and touched his paw. A little girl with a ribbon in her hair brought a pair of plastic dress-up shoes and placed them beside the oak tree. "These were mine," she said, "but I'm big now. He can have them." Benji wrote her name beside the entry and added a flower doodle. She gave her future memories, he whispered. In the early afternoon, Linda came. She didn't say anything at first. She simply sat with us and held Scout's paw in both hands. When she finally spoke, it was through a quiet smile. "You turned the world into something softer," she told him. By mid-afternoon, the breeze shifted. Warm and sweet, like it had traveled through miles of blooming fields. Scout lifted his head, sniffed the air, and let out a low, pleased sound. Benji set down his pencil. "Done," he said. The drawing showed Scout on the rise, the entire garden before him, each shoe glowing softly, the wind lifting the petals from flowers and carrying them like confetti. In the sky above, outlines of shoes turning into stars. At the bottom, Benji wrote, "He gathered the things we left behind and gave them back as love." We sat together for a long time. People came and went. Some stayed to help tidy. Others sat in quiet corners and read from books or held hands. One man played a harmonica softly near the edge of the woods. As the sun lowered, Scout's eyes grew heavier. Benji rested a hand on his back. "It's okay," he said. Scout gave one last tail thump and closed his eyes. He didn't open them again. We didn't move right away. We just sat with him. The garden grew still. The wind paused. The birds didn't sing. It felt like even the world was kneeling. That night, neighbors came with lanterns. One by one, they lined the trail with soft lights. Some stayed and lit candles around Scout's mat. Others stood in silence and watched the stars appear. We wrapped Scout in the blanket he'd used every morning and placed him at the center of the garden, surrounded by shoes, scarves, socks, and stories. People left notes, drawings. One woman left her wedding shoes. Another gave a leash from a dog long gone. Benji didn't cry that night. He just held the journal close and said, he didn't take anything with him. He gave it all away. Over the next week, something incredible happened. New shoes arrived, but not just in tribute. They came with little tags attached, for someone who needs to remember. For healing. For beginning again. People no longer came only to say goodbye. They came to connect, to reflect, to add something that might help the next person. The garden had changed. It was no longer about Scout's collection. It was about continuation. Benji built a new bench and carved a small plaque into it. Scout walked this path once. Now we walk it for each other. He buried the final journal beneath the oak tree in a metal case. On top of it, he placed Scout's collar. A week later, the first crocus bloomed through the spot where Scout had rested. People said it was just timing. I said it was a hello. Every season after, more flowers bloomed, more shoes came, more stories were shared. Benji started a foundation, the Scout Garden Project. He raised money to create spaces like ours in other towns, quiet places with paths and benches where people could leave what they needed to and find what they didn't know they'd lost. And everyone had a pair of golden shoes near the entrance. They never stayed untouched. The story of a dog who collected shoes became a story about how we all carry pieces of each other and how healing begins when we share the weight. Scout taught us how to remember, and the garden remembers him. Every single day,